Hey everybody, and welcome to Aaron's Indie View. Today we are going to be interviewing Kevin LaPorte, publisher and writer for Inverse Comics. This is kind of a new show that I'm just starting. After a year of no conventions and not being able to get out and meet other comic creators, I figure I need to just reconnect with some people and just talk about comics. You know, it's been crazy. So Kevin, you were the first guest on this episode. I'm very excited to have you.
Well, thanks for inviting me to be a part of it.
Yeah, well, we've chatted before in my old podcast, Comics DNA. We did a few. So I see you on Facebook, you know, every now and then talking about various books and Kickstarters that you got going. But I don't know how much, since we've never actually met in person, and I've never actually met you at a convention, like we just met on social media.
Right.
So I don't know how much about you and your comics history. I don't know much other than just what I've gleaned off of social media. So I'm curious. I saw on your website that would be inversepress.com.
Yep.
It's 10 years at the edge of comics culture. Have you been publishing for 10 years?
We have, as of October of 20.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That was 10 years since we actually put out our own book in print.
Yeah.
And it's certainly evolved since that time. But my partner, Amanda Rachels, and I have been publishing since 2010.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, you were getting into it just right around the same time that I was.
Yeah.
I started writing and doing webcomics in 2009, and I didn't really start printing things until 2012. So
yeah,
there was a little bit of a gap between when I started hitting conventions and when I was doing comics. But yeah, that's crazy. I think it has been 10 years.
Yeah, but right around that time, there were all these resources that developed on the internet, and just there was a serendipity to it. It all came sort of to fruition at the same time. Kickstarter happened. You got indie publishing houses, or printers rather, like Kablam, for example, and a few others like Kablam. And it just made it so that everybody could make a comic if they wanted to do the work.
That's correct. It did sort of feel like that was like the beginning of a new age in small press and self-publishing.
Absolutely.
I can't remember, were you on the digital webbing website?
I have used digital webbing to recruit artists in the past, but I was never really involved in the discussion groups.
Okay. Yeah, like on the message boards and stuff.
Right.
Yeah. I was on there like for a little bit, but I kind of came at the tail end of that website's heyday, as it were. But it is still a very valuable resource for finding, you know, other artists or other creators just in general. But I know I definitely don't regularly post on there or anything, you know, ever since again, just thinking about all the changes that have happened in the 10 years. Like when I was starting this, you know, I always think about how weird it is. Like when I was like, I want to do comics, and I'll do a web comic. This was before Kickstarter existed. This was before when there was like just the idea of like an online hub where people would publish. Like this was before Webtoons, you know. I think there might have been Tapastic might have been around in some form, but it was still kind of in that era where everybody had their own website and you just posted on your website, and this was before like Twitter and Facebook, you know, before everybody just communicated on that. So it's weird to think of how different things are now than just in the span of 10 years, you know.
Yeah, and we went through a very similar process. We did a web comic throughout 2009.
Okay.
And it was in sort of the landscape format, so that for the computer screen better. We paid way too much money for a website to host that thing and try to look good.
Yeah.
And we didn't know what we were doing. The comic is okay, and it was definitely a huge learning and evolutionary experience for us as creators and just as people trying to make a professional looking comic.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how many people, like the two of us, went through the same sort of set of steps as the industry evolved, particularly online.
Yeah. It was a very quick evolution, I think. And I always felt like I was 1 or 2 steps behind, you know, everybody. Like there's always somebody else that's on the cutting edge, and I'm kind of just looking around going, I don't even know what works, but I'm just going to try something.
we all kind of feel like that.
Yeah. So I'm curious a little bit about so you said you got in, it was about 10 years ago is when you started publishing. Like what drove you to kind of take that plunge, take that step to to start doing your own comics?
Yeah, it's a kind of an interesting story. Amanda and I had been doing that web comic for a while, and we came across, and I don't even know where we came across it, a contest called Small Press Idol.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
You remember that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was in 2010. And we sat down, and it was a situation. Of course, American Idol was going strong at that time, so it was something analogous to that for indie comic folks. And it basically allowed you to build a professional comic from the ground up. So you start with the concept, then you move to maybe character concepts, and then to a cover, like thumbnail. And I mean, it was very piecemeal. You put together your comic from the ground up. And so it was a great learning experience. And there were some people who were the judges and the people that ran the competition who had some indie experience. They weren't real experienced creators, but more experienced than we were, for sure. We got a lot of good advice. We learned a lot about making a comic without just kind of flying by the seat of our pants, and how to set up a file per print, which is a big deal.
Took me forever to learn all about that, like just proper dimensions and
bleed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, your trim and your bleed. Yeah, all that.
Yeah, and so we learned all that doing that competition. We actually led that competition until the last day, and then lost at the end. And it was basically a popularity contest. It was how many people you could get to come on and vote for you.
Yeah.
And there was another entrant who had a really nice comic who beat us at the end. And one of the cool things about that contest is we have kept in touch with about half those contestants that were in that competition with us to this very day.
Yeah.
And some of them are also still making comics. I think you know Ronald Montgomery.
Yeah, I was going to mention him. I think he said that's where you guys met.
Absolutely. That's where we met Ron. Yeah. And he's published a couple of books through us, a couple of anthologies, and some of the other guys we just keep in touch with casually. Sometimes they put out comics, but they always support what we do, and vice versa. It was a great experience.
Yeah, that's cool.
And really put us in a position to make real comics after that. And they weren't great, but they were definitely better than they were before.
Yeah. Well,
we learned a lot.
That's like the creator's journey. It's just like each thing, just improving and building and sort of gaining that knowledge, and just keep working. I think that's the key. Just keep working.
Yeah. And the book we did through that competition was called Clown Town. And it became what is our flagship title now, called Vicious Circus. And it's still our flagship title. We're still making content. There it is.
Got a copy of that right here. I don't know if you can see it through the glare, but I got that right there. I think awesome. It had to have been from a Kickstarter.
Yeah. I think that one was 2015.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, but that's cool. So you guys have had a lot of success with doing Kickstarter and stuff, from what I have seen.
Yeah, I've run 50 Kickstarters.
50? Are you for real? 50?
We've done 50 Kickstarters since 2010.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm sorry I haven't supported all 50. I think I might have supported 5.
We appreciate it.
That seems insane to me. That Kickstarters.
I'm quite the masochist, apparently.
Wow. Yeah.
But yeah, that's we enjoy running the campaigns. We enjoy making the books, and we've been able to produce the output and fulfill very quickly. So it's worked out for us, and it keeps it going.
Yeah, no, that's good. I do think that's another one of those things, like in the new market, the new indie comic market that we're in. I think crowdfunding, Kickstarter and Indiegogo, that's almost the essential, if not only, way to go these days. There are a few others that exist, depending on like the type of comic you're doing, or what you are. But I think as far as like making books goes, I think crowdfunding is kind of that's the new essential tool.
There's no doubt about it, because there's no way to make money that you can put back into your comics if you go through the direct market through previews or Diamond. You just can't do it. I mean, the margins are so razor thin, and there's too many hands in the pot. And we do work with shops. We do get our books into some shops, not huge distribution, but some, not through previews. It's something we're looking into, again, just to explore. But you're right. Without crowdfunding, I'm not sure there would be much of an indie comics game outside of webcomics.
Yeah.
Webcomics supposed to be flourishing, of course, as they are.
Right.
But as far as making print comics, I'm not sure there would be much available without crowdfunding these days.
Yeah.
It's a whole different, I mean, there's a whole dynamic field of indie comics opportunities now because of crowdfunding. There's so many possibilities. It's really great. It's fun.
Yeah. It is kind of incredible, actually. I think I see, because like my social media network is almost exclusively, other indie comics creators, and it's really fascinating to me to see how there are. It's almost like a new what's the word I'm thinking of? Just like a new, I don't want to necessarily say a movement, but there is like this new community. I guess that's the word I'm thinking. Just this new community of, there's so many people that are just out there making indie comics, and they're almost completely separated from the comic book industry proper, and it feels like it's the old joke, like people have been predicting the destruction of the comic book industry since like 1950, so right. It's just always like, there's always the comic book industry has this like cloud of doom that's been over it for 50 years minimum, if not more. It's just every decade somebody's like, this is it, this is the end, it's not going to survive this. And then it's kind of been going along. But it does seem like in the last 20 years, maybe even like the 2000s, it does seem to be in this like weird decline. And I don't mean it to be actually a decline, because I think there are different metrics you can point to, like graphic novel sales are skyrocketing.
Right.
Kids are reading more books now than ever. Libraries, there's so many. What it is it's a fracturing. There's, so like Marvel comic sales, their monthly comic books may be going down, but more people than ever are reading comic books. They're just getting them in different ways. And I think that Kickstarter plays a huge part of that. And this whole indie comic scene.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that Kickstarter has changed the game that way. And you could just look at the numbers, and I didn't look at them directly before we talked today, but they're enormous.
Oh yeah.
Just look at the raw sales numbers in the comics category. And the comics category is routinely the second or third most successfully funded category on Kickstarter. Which is crazy.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. It seems like, if you just look at the numbers, looking at Kickstarter's metrics, like there's so many comics. Like it almost seems like Kickstarter is a comic platform now. It almost feels like that.
Yeah, and they give it that sort of attention. I mean, I think they realize what they've got there that's unique among their other categories. And certainly board games are another one.
Games are a huge one. Yeah.
That's changed the industry. And I think that we're seeing the same thing in comics.
Yeah.
Through Kickstarter. Certainly the web presence, webtoons, you mentioned Tapas, different, but also Comixology.
Yeah, that's another one.
The major companies have their unlimited apps, DC Infinite, Marvel Unlimited. They're going to that for a reason.
Exactly.
Because there's money there. There's
where the readers are.
There. Yeah, and they're putting original content there. They're not putting in print. That's a real thing. So is Comixology. They're investing in basically their own imprint through their unlimited app. So it's I think you're right. It's a fracturing. It's a different market, but definitely not one that's dying. In fact, it seems more vibrant than ever. And I've been reading comics since the mid 70s.
Yeah, I agree. It's weird to think about too. Like you said, like you've been reading since the mid 70s, so you've seen so many different eras of the comic book reader, and it's strange to me to think that. When I was in grade school, I was a comic book reader from a very young age. Like I practically learned to read on comic books. Like I was reading Spider-Man and X-Men and G.I. Joe comics from the 80s into the 90s. That's like all I remember is that. And so I remember being the only person I knew that read comic books, and now it's like comic books are so ubiquitous, like they're just everywhere. It's strange to think that that it's like, this is almost the future that I wished for, you know?
Yes.
Like there's like a Marvel movie there. Well, until last year, there was like 3 Marvel movies every year, you know? It was just, it's such the opposite of like my experience being like the geeky outsider kid who was into Spider-Man, you know, like it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I remember I had 1 or 2 friends that read comics that I was able to hang out with, but I would be in Walden Books, and that's, you know, dating me back deep into the 80s. But on this reading from the spinner rack, and I was literally the only person that was ever picking up a book from the spinner racks. And as you mentioned now, I mean, we didn't have any comic book movies when Batman '89 came out. I mean, everybody's minds were blown.
Yeah,
and it holds up just fine.
it
Still
does.
a great movie, but to have the caliber of entertainment we have now. I mean, even the bad movies, I watch them just because, you know, just because I enjoy the characters. But something like WandaVision, that's such a meta take on superheroes and superhero movies, and even comics to a certain extent.
Yeah,
Have something to me that's so intelligently done and so tightly put together from comic book stuff is super exciting. And
yeah,
and there are other examples. That's just the most recent one everybody's really tied into. But people that I never would have expected to like a comic book property are fascinated with that show.
Yeah, no, that's totally
really
true.
Cool.
It's reaching a whole new audience.
Yeah.
But so talking about Kickstarter, so I can't get over you doing 50 Kickstarters. So you don't have to give me any hard numbers, but have you had 50 successful Kickstarters?
Yes. The only ones that weren't successful, thanks. I had one. We do a parallel line of pro wrestling biographies called Square Circle Comics. And one of those I launched with a really bad reward setup. So I canceled it and relaunched it the next day.
Okay.
After I launched it. And then we started an ill-fated card game at one point that didn't fly. So there's the only 2 that didn't fund.
So I'm curious, like you've 50 Kickstarters under your belt and having the experience. What would you say is probably the most essential thing to keep in mind throughout your whole campaign? Like the essential thing to keep it to, like, the most important thing to remember while you're running it to keep it successful?
That you have to work on it every day.
Yeah.
You know, day jobs, families. It gets discouraging when you have a bad day without any pledges.
Yeah.
Things like that, or just not enough pledges, or if you didn't fund quickly enough. You have to grind it out, and you have to do the work every day. You have to put your updates out. You have to send your emails out. You have to contact media outlets, or you have to work with other creators to cross promote. You got to do the work every day, even when it's slow, even when you're discouraged, even when you're tired, because that campaign will die on the vine if you are not giving it the attention that it needs, or getting the attention to it that it needs in whatever way you have built around your audience and that property.
I agree. That was something that I struggled with when I first got into doing a Kickstarter campaign, because this is certainly a problem that I think a lot of inexperienced people have, and I think it was even more of a problem when Kickstarter was new, because I think I started doing my first Kickstarters maybe the first, definitely like the second year that Kickstarter existed. So it was still new. And there was kind of just this idea, a naive idea, but an idea that a lot of people would have, that you would just put the Kickstarter up there and people would find it. Like they would go to Kickstarter.com and just look for stuff.
Yeah.
And that is definitely not how it works. And I think now, after so many years, I think people are tuned into that. But it was like this, it was a very harsh lesson that a lot of people needed to learn. It was definitely something that I had to learn. Like I was very discouraged early on, because I did what I thought was a lot of work putting together a Kickstarter. And it's not to say that it wasn't, because it is a lot of work putting in a Kickstarter. And then when I realized there's so much more work that needs to be done, and like you said, you got to keep it going all 30 days. And it's just like, it can be very demoralizing if you don't just like immediately take off. And I think that's the first thing that a creator just needs to get over.
And these days it's more important, because today, for example, we're running a Kickstarter right now, and so I was just glancing at the environment in the comics category today. There are 234 comics projects live on Kickstarter right now. That's a lot of comic books. Now, only about 55-60% of those are going to end up funding. There's probably a good 20 to 30% that are dead projects already, but people didn't know how to do it. They gave up. That happens a lot. They didn't have an audience, whatever the case may be. But still, you're talking about a couple hundred projects that you're competing with for eyes, and pledges. And so you've got to get your people that follow your projects to that page, and not trying to skim through and saying, "Oh, I can spend my money better with this guy." Yeah, you got to get them to your page, and thankfully Kickstarter has put together a lot of tools in the past year, honestly, the past 1 to 2 years, to help you do that. It's a lot different than it used to be.
I think so. Yeah, I think Kickstarter is, they're aware that, the more they can help creators on their platform, the more money they're making. So it's just a symbiotic relationship, as it were.
Absolutely.
But so you talked about that, like finding your audience, and it's really important to kind of get them hooked on your project. There's been so many times I've gone to Kickstarter and I've seen some book I've never heard of. And it's not like I'm like an all-knowing person. Like, there's so many books out there, I can't keep track of everything. But there'll be like a book I've never heard of that's got like a $30,000 goal, and it's reached it. And I'm just like, where are these people? How do they get, who are all these people that are supporting this thing that I've just never heard of? It's so strange. So how, I mean, having 50 Kickstarters under your belt, I have to assume that you have an audience. Like, you've managed to connect with some people. I'm curious, like, what do you do that mostly through social media? Like, how do you really go about getting that audience?
Honestly, it builds through Kickstarter primarily. When we came out of that small press idol competition, we had an audience of about 30 or 40 people, and they stuck with us for our first 3 or 4 Kickstarters. And a lot of them still buy our books today. But as we built those Kickstarters and they were successful, people liked the book. They liked what they were getting. They liked the service they were getting. They were getting them timely. If there was a problem, we fixed it, things like that. And so we built trust. And that group has built over the years, to the point now that we recognize a lot of the names that hit our campaigns really quickly. And we're still growing that. We had our largest Kickstarter ever in January. We did almost $12,000 for Vicious Circus, the latest issue. And we've seen growth. And when you have one of those big hits like that, you immediately see growth around the rest of your products. And so I expect the next time we do Vicious Circus here in a couple of months, the next issue will come out. We're actually just serializing it through Kickstarter now. Yeah,
I've noticed that. Yeah, you've done. 50 Kickstarters. Yes, I see them pop up all the time. I know, because I'm sorry. Were you gonna follow up with something? Oh, okay. I was just gonna say I'm talking about when I see your projects, and I primarily am just on Facebook when it comes to social media, and so that's where I see all of your posts. Do you do any other social media, or are you pretty much just on Facebook?
I use Instagram.
Okay.
But Instagram is notoriously fickle.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I've ever had an Instagram follower that wasn't already a follower in some other way on our email list or through Facebook that backed a Kickstarter campaign. I was listening to a podcast called Comic Lab the other day, and these guys have tens of thousands of Instagram followers, and they were laughing because they're like, nobody from Instagram, like 0, come to back our Kickstarters.
Yeah.
So I use Instagram, but it just seems to be running in place. And I gave up on Twitter a long time ago.
Same.
It just doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
I couldn't build there. I couldn't get anybody to follow. I couldn't get anybody to be interested in what we were doing. I'm not sure why. So I don't try very much there. So our email list, the resources that Kickstarter allows to contact people through updates from previous projects, those are gold. And then I use a tool through BackerKit, use their launch program, and it basically notifies anybody that's backed your project before that you've launched a new project.
Okay.
And, but honestly, Kickstarter does that now.
Yeah,
I've noticed that I get notifications when anybody I've ever backed. Yeah.
Yep. I did that for when I did last year. I did my Kickstarter for my book, The Amoral Stingray. And since that book spun out of another book that I did, Zero's Heroes, which I also had on Kickstarter several years ago, it was really easy process of just message everybody that supported Zero's Heroes and, let them know that there's a spinoff book on Kickstarter. So it's been a while since I looked at the metrics, and sometimes it can be hard to trace directly, like where your bumps are coming from. But yeah, I mean, every little bit counts, and to just get attention on it.
Oh yeah, and social media. Just you mentioned that specifically, and it's not just my impression. This is based on data. People like Tyler James at Comics Launcher.
Oh yeah, that guy
like that is yeah,
he's
the
genius.
Mastermind.
Yeah.
Yeah, but social media does not translate very well into backers on Kickstarter. We definitely get some play from social media posts on Kickstarter, but they're people that I knew were going to back anyway. That's just how I notify them.
Yeah,
that we have a project live, but getting new people is harder on social media.
That's interesting that you say that, because that was actually something I wanted to talk to you about. I'm always just fascinated about social media and how different people use it differently. But like you said, you just couldn't get any traction on Twitter, and I was kind of the same way. I just did not like Twitter. I've heard a lot of people say they just don't like posting on Twitter because of the environment, or what.
Yep.
It does seem like different personality types kind of gravitate toward different social media platforms. Because as I said, I'm on Facebook, and that's mostly just because a bunch of my friends are on Facebook, and a handful of them are also on Twitter. But I think a lot of the people that are on Facebook are exclusively on Facebook. I don't think there's, as much. There's going to be some crossover, and usually if there is, it's on a professional level. It's somebody who just knows they're just trying to get on every social media to reach as many people as possible. But one thing I've noticed, and I mean this as a compliment, it's not a backhanded compliment, but I have noticed that your presence on Facebook, it's very it's not a boisterous presence, if that makes any sense. Like, I know some people in the indie comics community that are very loud. I would describe them as loud social media users. They have to have a hot take on everything. They're constantly advertising their products, or whatever they're doing at the time. They're just like comments on everything, like 50 posts a day. And it feels like it in many ways, and it's not to say that they're doing it without some success, because it does seem like that does draw attention. But what I have noticed is that you're somebody who I would describe as fairly subdued on Facebook. Like, I enjoy your posts, but usually, I don't see you giving hot takes on every little thing that happens every day.
No.
And because like I don't either, because I'm just not that type of person. Like, I'm just not interested in doing that. And so I'm impressed to see that you're still finding such success on Kickstarter while not having to play this like social media one-upsmanship where you're constantly tagging people and constantly popping off about every little thing. I don't know. So yeah. I guess it's interesting that you said that you don't think social media translates into backers on Kickstarter. How does I'm just any comment on that? Like, what do you think about that?
I think early on when we were doing that contest in particular, I'd say I was much younger, but I was 40, so I wasn't really young when we were doing that. But we tried really hard to reach out to people. Facebook was new. And I think we probably overkilled it quite a bit, trying to get votes in that competition, and then for the first few Kickstarters. And I learned from that being overbearing about what I'm doing on Kickstarter on Facebook isn't going to get me anywhere. People want to me, what's worked for us is being genuine, being somebody that's relatable or at least accessible, rather than somebody that's got to be involved in every political discussion, or at most, I'm going to share some stupid meme, that just makes me laugh and that people are going to find funny. But in comics, things can get very polarized politically, and I'm not getting involved in any of that, because then you get on one side of the fence or the other, and you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
I totally agree. Yeah, I've tried to take the same position too, and I sort of feel like there's a lot of people, there's like an obvious temptation to just like look at like a popular group and just immediately latch onto that to try and boost your own profile. And that's how everything just sort of spirals out of control. And I do think that over time, integrity wins out. And I think if you just be yourself, be your honest self, and just focus on your product, your art, there's always that intermingling of art and product. But, I do think that that's the most important thing. That's key.
Yeah. And if I can leave my belief systems or personality out of it, other than to be somebody that they know is going to give them a hell of a comic book that they're going to want to read and that they're going to look forward to the next one, then I've won.
Yeah, I agree. I'm somebody who's like, so like I'm a writer, and so I can't help like my feeling is like, if I just want people to read the work that I do, and I want people, if they get any ideas about like the things that I think, I want them to discern them from the stuff that I'm writing, and I want them to get something out of that. I don't want to just tell somebody on Facebook like just a bunch of things that I think. Like, that's boring to me. Like, I want to put it into a story, and I want people to experience it that way.
Yeah, and it's also not something that's just somebody's opinion isn't going to translate into entertainment.
I agree.
They're going to come back for again, because you're going to alienate them or annoy them. Even if they agree with you, if you keep hammering it home too much on social media, they're going to get sick of seeing it, and
I think so.
Then they're not going to see your comics anymore either.
Yeah. Well, and I've seen so many people that have like quit using social media, and these are people that I know personally. They're just like, I'm just tired of the whole thing, and I think a lot of that comes from this polarization and the way everybody uses it to just be so intense all the time, and it can be very overbearing. There are some people that they don't want to deal with that.
No, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And it's a shame. It's a really nice way to keep in touch with people, which is what I enjoy about it. People that I don't get to see or moved away or things like that. But and it's nice to let people know about the comics. But I'll be honest, most people on my personal profile who are friends with me on Facebook, they don't back the comics. It's family, it's friends who just aren't comic readers. There are a lot that do, but most, they're supportive. They're happy that we're doing what we enjoy. Yeah. But they're just not comics folks.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about like your books and the stuff that you guys are publishing. So, well, what you talked about, you have a Kickstarter going right now. What book is that for?
That's for Last Ride of the Four Horsemen, our steampunk horror book.
Okay. Now I know you guys do a lot of horror stuff. I know especially the stuff that Amanda Rachels does is really horror focused. Do you just prefer horror as a genre? Is that just something you've always been into?
I guess.
I'm not sure that it's entire.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's intentional. I mean, we definitely like horror, but we like for our own horror entertainment. Amanda likes all horror, and even if it's bad, just something to laugh at.
Sure.
But I like old goofy horror, like Nightmare on Elm Street and things like that. Hellraiser, which
classics,
classics. But there's still a goofiness to some of those stories that appeals to me on some level, and but I think that forms some sort of undercurrent in our creative lives. It's like we get an idea for a story, and no matter what genre that story is in its formative stages, there's going to be some horror undercurrent by the time we get to the point that we're doing script concepts and character concepts and things like that. And I think it's just in our DNA. Yeah, honestly, things just tend to flow that way. Not everything is heavy horror, but there's always those elements for us. This is just what's in our bones.
So when you started publishing, like you said, coming out of this small press, the indie
Small press idol.
small press idol. Yeah, thank you. Like that, you said that was the first. Did you were doing a webcomic before you started doing that?
Yeah, we were doing a webcomic called The Blind Eye, which is kind of a superhero horror.
Okay, so like what like have you just always been a comic book reader? You just love comics? Like what made you kind of take that plunge into, producing your own comic?
Well, I remember reading comics as early as like 1976, 77. I would have been 5 or 6 years old, and just spinner racks, man. Spinner racks were fantasy land at that age. There was so much to see, and the stories were so different than anything you'd see on TV.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's so cool feeling to read those old Marvel comics, the Hulk and Iron Man books in particular for me at that age, and they just took root with me. And then I discovered Chris Claremont in the early 80s, and life changed forever.
Oh, yeah.
Those Claremont X-Men books are, to this day, the gold standard for me in comics. And so I was about, I guess I was 38 or 39 years old when we started doing this. So I definitely wasn't a youngster at the time. But Amanda has always been drawing comics since she was a teenager.
Okay.
And she asked me to write just like a concept script because she wanted something to submit to try to get some work. And we enjoyed the collaboration so much that we decided to move and do this web comic. And then we did that for 64 slides, I think we did for that book or for that web comic. And then the small press idol thing came up, and we fell in love with the clowns that we created and that whole story. And from there, I'm kind of a process junkie, and I love to make things and get into building systems around making things and stuff like that. And so it's become really addictive to me to go through this, to make it, to see it to come to life, right to the point that it's in my hands and I can put in somebody else's hands. So it's a lot of fun. I don't see it stopping anytime soon.
Yeah. So, was that have you done any writing before, or was that kind of the first time you'd really decided to write?
In my day job, I write a lot of policies in the mental health field and Medicaid policy. So I write constantly, but I had not written creatively since probably college at that point.
All right.
So I did a lot of research on script writing for comics. Dwayne McDuffie, rest in peace. He had a really great website back in those days, and he would just throw scripts up there for new writers to download to see how he structured a script, and he was so good at it. It taught me so much about writing concisely for a penciler, rather than writing 4 paragraphs describing one panel and every little detail.
I think that's something a lot of people, when they get new into writing comics, like it's so easy to underwrite the script, but it's also really easy to overwrite the script, because there's this weird dynamic where you're writing a script, you're not necessarily telling the story, you're explaining to the artist what the story is going to be, And so there's a lot of people that I've read scripts before where they it'll have like a cliffhanger and be in the script, and it'll be like there's this mysterious thing, and it's like you're explaining to your artist what they need to draw. You can tell them what the mysterious thing is, so they know how to artistically know what it is, but also make it a mystery. Like this, for me, script writing is much more of, it's like a conversational dialogue between me and the artist. Like I like to keep things pretty loose and explain kind of the atmosphere and the feeling that I'm going for in a certain scene, and then you lay out the events as they happen, but it's the artist's job to depict it, and so I expect them to kind of bring that to the table. What is your writing process like? Do you just sit down and just go full script, start with an outline?
I have a pretty step-by-step process where I will just jot down a paragraph or two about what I want in an issue, and then I will take from a whole story. It might be usually go 4 to 6 issues with our series, and then I will flesh that out into a 4 to 6 page Bible for that story. So I'll break down a synopsis for each issue, so I know the story beats I want to happen in each issue. I'll set up the characters I know that are going to be a part of it. They probably don't even have names at that point. I'll just describe them. Steampunk Cowboy X, and then I'll come up with a name at some point.
A lot of my outlines have like, it'll start with like main character, in all caps, and it's like does this, and then it'll just be abbreviated MC throughout the whole thing. Yep. And then when I get to the script, I'm like, I guess I got to come up with a name. But it's just like most of my outlines just say MC does this.
Yeah, but it's all these faceless folks until you actually get to the point where you need to put a face on them.
Yeah.
I'll actually, one thing I started doing 4 or 5 years ago was actually writing out the story arcs for those characters from start to finish in the story, what I anticipate to happen for them. That's going to be their conflict. That's going to change them some way or another during the story. And that's fluid. That's going to shift once I start doing full script, but that gives me a roadmap. So those characters have some dimension to them and some agency besides just being flat on the page.
Right.
And so once I've got that down, I will actually go through and do a couple of sentences, 1 or 2 sentences per page for an issue. And then I take that and break it out into full script.
Yeah, that's actually incredibly similar to my process. I always start big and just like whittle it down smaller and smaller. So it starts with an page outline of the whole story. And then I'll kind of go through, if it's like an issue, I'll go through, like if it's like a 4-issue graphic novel or whatever, I'll kind of break down this 20 some odd pages, this happens, and so on and so forth. And then I'll go down by the issue and break it down by the page and say, this happens on this page, this happens on this page, until I get to the end of the 24. Then I'll go back, page 1, panel 1, and kind of just, there's like a refinement process of you're constantly chipping away at it. I think that's the easiest and fastest way to work. It took me like 10 years to figure that out.
Well, and in comics, when you're working, if you're setting a fixed number of pages for your story for yourself, it's a good way to get the timing down.
Yeah.
So that the story flows smoothly from start to finish. And so that you're spreading out the action and the changes and the character moments throughout the whole story. And so it all feels fluid and even, and the big moments feel big and the small moments feel intimate. It's just writing that way, because you're in a confined space, and comics are so based on the flip and on timing.
Yep.
That it just makes it work better to me.
I agree. I think pacing is so essential to a lot of books, and that's definitely something I think a lot of people that start in webcomics kind of struggle with, because while it's great to have this potentially unlimited canvas, it can also be really easy for you to just kind of get lost without any pacing, because this scene can just go on indefinitely. And, some people it works and some people it doesn't, it's just because it's just so much or so little, you don't have a sense of like the flow of the story. And that can kind of get lost in a lot of web-based comics. So I think working with a strong outline is very important, especially if you're going to print. Because I do think there's two, again, we're talking about this new community of comics, and I still think that there's still like a separation between a lot of like web comic readers and like indie comic readers. And I still think there's a little bit of a barrier there. There's crossover, but I don't necessarily think that the people that are reading all the webtoons every day are the same people that are supporting all of the indie comics on Kickstarter necessarily.
I agree 100%. That's definitely two separate groups of people, and there's some bleed through, as you mentioned, but for the most part, they're separate. And I think those two groups are separate from the people that still go to comic shops every Wednesday.
Agreed. Yeah.
It's just we set up in a comic shop locally yesterday and sat around for a few hours and sold some books. It was nice to see people again and interact with people that love comics. And we went through several sets of books yesterday. It was awesome. It was just like 3 or 4 hours. But you get reminded that those people aren't going to Kickstarter. They're coming to their shop, and they love the books that we have, but they want to get them off of a table or a shelf and flip through them and hold them in their hands before they buy it. That's just the way they're built. But when they pick them up and look at them, they're like, oh, this is awesome. And they buy the whole set. And they're happy. And and they're like, I'll check out the Kickstarter, but I know those folks are not going to back the Kickstarter. That's just not what they do. That's not their comic experience. And just, it's a weird thing about comics readers, being a comic reader myself. We just have our own unique ways that we want to interface with our chosen genre of entertainment.
Yeah. That's why as much as I love this new era of digital comics and web comics, I'm just not a digital comic reader. I think it's great that they're out there and it's an outlet for people if you want to read comics like that. But I just can't. I need to have a book in my hands. That's just how I read it. That's just how I do it. And I think there's a lot of people that are like that too,
A lot of people that are still like that. And so it's, it's one thing we've missed in not having conventions. We've gone to one convention in the last 12 months, and just being able to put those books from Kickstarter in people's hands so they see this is a legit comic. This is a comic that you're going to enjoy just like you enjoy comics you buy at your shop.
Right.
It just comes from a different place because we can't deal with Diamond.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's good that you brought up comic book conventions, because I wanted to talk about that briefly, at least before we wrap this up. Pretty sure I told you we want to keep this about an hour. I don't want to, waste your time or waste anybody's time that's trying to get involved in listening to this. But I wanted to ask, so how long have you been doing comic conventions?
We started doing conventions before we started doing Kickstarter. When we had the webcomic, we went to MegaCon, and I think we went to HeroesCon that year. Okay. I don't know what we were trying to do. We had nothing to sell. Amanda started doing commissions, but it wasn't even something we prepared for.
Yeah.
Somebody just suggested it while we were there. So we got a crash course in comic convention sales and life. And we love going to cons. So it's definitely been missed, but it's only been in the past 5-6 years that we built enough inventory to really have a presence that's felt at cons, and it certainly has changed how we experience and enjoy cons. But we're starting to see a few pop up. We've got one in Huntsville in April, and then one in Tallahassee in June. And so they're starting to come back out there with safety precautions and so forth.
Yeah. I mean, literally a full year without comic conventions. I know that's hurt a lot of people that really do make their livelihood, doing the con circuit. Like those people are out there, and I'm not just talking about the print wall artists. There's people like creators that regularly hit up cons, or or artists that do commission work and original art. So has not having that comic convention, how has that affected your production? Like, it seems like you're still just kind of pumping books. Like, I guess doing Kickstarter kind of has that advantage of your audience is there online somewhere.
Yeah, Kickstarter is probably our primary audience, and the only way not having cons has affected us is that I reduce the print runs, because I know I'm not going to have anywhere to sell these books outside of our website. And so I just proportionally reduce the amount that I print. Outside of trades like this, the current Kickstarter is for a collected edition trade. So even with just a couple of conventions scheduled, I'm still going to print more of those, because I know down the road I can sell the hell out of those at a show, regardless of how long it takes those shows to come out. But floppies, I'm not even considering numbers of those for conventions, because it's just not what it was right now. And I think it's going to bounce back, and I think it's going to bounce back really well. But we're just focusing on trades and keeping collected editions. They sell better anyway at cons. But
I've noticed
that's the main way the main way it's influenced us.
Yeah. So like doing floppies, like the issues versus the trades, is that how you've done most of your books? Like, you print issues and then do collected editions, or have you done some that are just straight to the graphic novel? What's your experience with that?
Most of the time, we've tried to do floppies first and then do a trade. And in a couple of situations, we didn't do that. Like the story Scissor Sisters that we did a few years ago, we went right to the trade. And at that time, it was just to preserve my sanity. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
love that book. just to preserve my sanity, because I didn't want to run 6 Kickstarters.
Yeah.
At that time, my philosophy was a little different then. We really ramped up since then. Because if I did that book today, I would absolutely do a Kickstarter per issue and then do one for the collected book, because you build your audience with every campaign. You just build that audience with every campaign. And if you look at what's really killing on Kickstarter right now, is people that are serializing from a first issue all the way through. And by issue 10, they're pulling down 5 to 10 times what they were on the first campaign, because they've built that audience, and they're structuring their rewards for issue 10 for new people that come in and catching up with issues 1 through 9, but also they're dropping in special stuff, special reward tiers for those first issue backers too. So they're getting rewarded for sticking with them for 10 issues, but the new folks are getting a whole new set they can binge, which people love, all at once in a brand new campaign. And that's sort of what happened with our Vicious Circus campaign in January, is that people could come in and buy 6 books because we added a 0 issue in addition to issue 5. Instead of just getting 1 new issue. But if they already had the first 4, if they had the trade like the one that you have, then they could just get issue 0 and 5. And so we had a whole bunch of people congregate to support that campaign that otherwise might not support one or the other campaigns if we did a collected edition versus a single issue, or just the new issue and not the catch-up tiers or whatnot. So
yeah, it is. I mean, it's so obvious, I guess, but it does seem like Kickstarter, going with what we were saying earlier, like it is the new diamond, it is the new method of getting the direct sales, because like diamond has shifted so much that it's almost impossible for an indie comic to get into diamond, to get into comic book shops. But I remember the prevailing wisdom at the time when I first started, which was again 10 years ago, the idea was you do your single issues, you get it into diamond, you make your money back on that, and fund each issue with the sales of the previous issue, and then you do your collected edition, and then that's your forever book that you just keep in print and you make money off that. And now it's almost impossible to do that through diamond without some kind of mid-level small press book publisher backing you,
right?
And but just to do it on as independent is almost completely impossible. But the same method is like what I just described of doing the single issues is essentially what's working on Kickstarter for indie publishers, right? Like that's how you're doing it.
Difference being, if I put my issues out through Diamond, even if I'm successful at putting my issues out through Diamond, I still have to discount that book 60% off a $3.99 cover price.
Yeah,
it just isn't realistic for real comics. It's just not.
No, not anymore.
It's not realistic. I mean, we're not selling 2 million of these in every gas station in America like they were in the 70s, charging 35 cents an issue. It's just not happening that way. So it's the whole dynamic has changed. Whereas I can go on Kickstarter and sell those same books. I'm not going to sell as many, but my margin is going to be like 1,000 times more. In some cases, almost literally. I mean, just look at what Brian Pulido is doing. I mean, it's insane. He's got a Kickstarter now at close to $400,000.
That is insane.
Margins that have to be astronomical. I think his average pledge amount is like $175.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I'm so impressed with creators that can pull off those gigantic campaigns. I honestly don't know if I would be able to do it. Like I like a lot of creators, like I don't have like a natural head for business. Like I'm so focused on just making the book proper, like artistically what I want. And then to turn around and look at all the work that has to go into producing it. Like it really makes my head spin sometimes. So I'm always impressed when somebody can really just like latch onto that and make it happen.
Yeah. And it's happening more and more. I mean, you're seeing some of the second tier big comics publishers come to Kickstarter now. Skybound is running one now. It's over $80,000, The Walking Dead people. And Boom, of course, ran the Keanu Reeves, the infamous Keanu Reeves campaign a few months ago.
I saw that. Yeah, that was
1.4 million.
Yeah. I mean, I would expect nothing less with Keanu Reeves attached to it, but still,
Yeah. And that brings a lot of eyes to indie comics and a lot of eyes to Kickstarter, though. And I think that's why we're seeing the boom in the number of projects right now, is because everybody's like, I need to get back in on this.
Yeah, I agree. So I want to circle back a little bit to comic book conventions. We just got a little bit of time left, and it seems it's like not done it for a year. I've almost forgot everything about doing comic conventions. So were you able to just like you said you got one coming up? Like, were you able to just like jump back into the swing of it? Was there anything, and you haven't done it yet, obviously, but are you a little nervous about starting up again?
Not really. This convention, they actually went through with it back in July with like tons
Oh,
of
really?
social distancing and masking, and
Mhm.
and it was at the peak of the real fear over COVID
Right.
back in the summertime, and that was not well attended, but we did okay with sales. I mean, we
Yeah.
certainly came out of it in the black, and it's a great show run by a great guy. And so we're excited. We've kind of been planning for it
Hmm.
for a couple of months now. So we're ready to get back out there. We miss it. It was like I said, we were at a shop yesterday. It was just so nice to reconnect with humans
Yeah.
who love comics, and to talk about comics, and just to BS about comics for a little while.
Right. Right.
And so we're excited about that, and seeing some faces we haven't seen quite a while. And so more than nervous, I think we're excited.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Do you mostly do conventions just in your local area? Like, I know the like
Yeah,
I'm sorry, you're in are
I'm
you
in South Alabama
South
near.
Alabama? Okay, so
Yeah,
you're like
yeah,
near Florida and
yeah. I'm 30 minutes from Pensacola, Florida.
oh, I got you. Okay,
Hmm.
okay. So like are there a lot of conventions down there?
Yeah, Florida, of course, is full of conventions.
Yeah.
There are a couple of good conventions in Alabama. There are a couple of really good conventions in Mississippi, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, Florida, in the same time it would take you to drive to Disney, I can probably get to 20 conventions a year if I wanted to,
Wow.
just in Florida. Florida's
Yeah.
chock full of cons all the time.
Wow.
And not all of them are great,
Mm-hmm.
but if you pick your spots, you can do really well.
Yeah.
And
Have you traveled far for like a large convention? Have
we
you
used
like
to.
gone to like San Diego or New York or Chicago or anything like that?
We used to do things like that, but for us, it's not cost effective. And,
Mm-hmm.
we do okay. This business certainly pays for itself, which is
Well, that's
nice.
great. Congratulations
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah. It's nice. But when we did C2E2 one year, I did not get a chance to go. Amanda went,
Okay.
and she's gone to New York 3 times, I think, and set up
Mm-hmm.
with partners. We've done Heroes 3 times, two with me, and then she went with our buddies at Cosmic Times one time.
Mm-hmm.
And she's gone to San Diego, but not to set up. We've been as far as Albuquerque for cons.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, all kinds of things. But more recently, trying to keep more business minded about it, and to keep our
Mm-hmm.
costs down, and had a child. So
Yeah.
that kind of anchors us a little bit. We've tried to keep it mostly in the Southeast, just within driving range for us. And, if we could get comped for a show, or if it's somewhere we can drive to and drive back without paying for a place to stay,
Mm-hmm.
it cuts those expenses down and keeps us, or keeps our margins more realistic. And,
Yeah.
I don't want to just think about it in terms of money, but sometimes you got to think about it in terms of money.
You have to. It's so easy for your costs to just completely run away from you.
Yeah.
Like when I was starting out, I don't even want to think about the amount of money I wasted just from just being like, I'm just gonna just put all my money into this and see where it goes. And it's like you spent so much on stuff that now you didn't need, or could have been spent better. It's just frustrating.
I know that feeling 100%.
Right.
And I think we will at some point start trying to pick a good show to go to at a
Mm-hmm.
distance every year, just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll be something reasonable. I mean, New York, you're going to spend $8,000 to $12,000 to get a decent booth and set up and travel, and
Right.
there's just no way
Yeah.
we're ever going to see that money back.
Yeah, that's why I've never really like people always like friends and family are like, oh, you do comic books? Have you gone to San Diego yet? And I'm like, you got $10,000 to give me so I can make this trip happen? Because I don't,
I'm rooming with Robert Downey Jr., so I'll let you know how that goes.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Kevin, I think we're going to wrap it up here, but thank you very much for doing this.
Sure.
Let's do it again. I'd like to talk to
Yeah.
you and Amanda too, if she's
Yeah,
interested.
absolutely. Yeah, she'd definitely be interested.
Awesome. Well, we'll do that again. But before we sign off, where can people find your books? Like what should they look for?
Right now, through March 21st, we've got a Kickstarter running for a collected edition of Last Ride of the Four Horsemen, an oversized hardcover or softcover. These are 112-page books, complete stories. You don't have to know anything else about the story, read anything else before or after. We are at inversepress.com as our web store. You can find us on Facebook as Inverse Press. Just search for Inverse Press, will pop right up. And we run a podcast called Ain't No Such Thing. You can also find that on Facebook. That's a podcast about Southern horror
Nice.
legends. So we do a lot of things like that. So those are the primary places that we're active.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again for doing this. I'll put all the links in the description. And I will talk to you next time.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yep, thank you. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing and help spread the word to your family, friends, and enemies. If you also sign up for the Second Thought Comics newsletter, you can get the most up-to-date information about both this podcast and my own comics. For a limited time, I'm giving away a free digital copy of my latest graphic novel, The Amoral Stingray. That's right, a complete 118-page graphic novel, totally free, if you sign up for the newsletter before May 1st, 2021. Sign up now before it's too late. See you next time.